You'll often hear that Super Mario Bros. Changed the face of gaming. You'll also hear that Super Mario Bros. 3 took Mario to the next level. But what about Mario Bros. 2? Ask most people and they talk about it like it's one of those knockoff Wisdom Tree games. But why is that? People certainly didn't feel that way back in the day. Not only was it the first game to be featured on the cover of Nintendo Power, but it was also the third best-selling NES game of all time, selling more copies than the original Legend of Zelda and Metroid combined. But why all this postmodern hate for such a beloved title? Are we perhaps being a little too critical about Mario's second outing? In this edition of Perry Starman at Law, we take a closer look at some of the harsh criticisms Mario 2 has received over time, as well as highlight on some of the great things this game introduced. Let's start by taking a look at some of the game's biggest complaints head-on. Accusations. Japan already had a Mario 2. You know what? It did. And frankly, I bet none of you have played it nearly as much as you played Super Mario USA. And the reason's quite simple. It's the same game. Sure, there are poisonous mushrooms and, flying bloopers, but that doesn't change the fact that it could have passed as an add-on for this first Super Mario Bros. In fact, they managed to shoehorn it into Super Mario Bros. Deluxe as Super Mario Bros. For Super Players on the Game Boy Color, which, by the way, is probably the best port you can find of the original. The point being is that if you were one of the lucky people to play it, you'll quickly realize that it's really just a super hard Mario Bros. 1. And that's not just me. Nintendo of America thought the same thing at the time. So if we're not playing Super Mario Bros. 2, what are we playing? Well, Super Mario Bros. 2 began in Japan as a game called Yume Kojo, Doki Doki Panic, a game that Miyamoto admittedly spent more time on than Mario Bros. 2. It was a tie-in to the popular Japanese TV network Fuji TV for its Communication Carnival Yume Kojo event in 1987. I looked into what the hell the event's about, and I wasn't able to find much other than it was one of those strange Japanese festivals with some kind of corporate presence. Nintendo, being a good sport, developed some software that featured the festival's mascots as characters. Little did they know that more people would probably be talking about this game than the actual event 30 years later. Anyways, the game centered around two children being spirited away into a storybook and the rest of the family banding together to go rescue them. Clearly this doesn't smell like a Mario game right now. 4 characters, lost kids, an Arabian setting. So in order to wedge it into the Mario storyline, what did they do? This is so stupid. It was just like it was just a dream. This one always gives me issues, and for a variety of reasons. First of all, it's an NES platformer. Super Mario Bros. 2 was released in 1988, only 3 years into the NES's 10-year reign. It came out about a year after Legend of Zelda and 2 years before Final Fantasy. Needless to say, it's clear that American gamers were not concerned with story this time. The technology was simple, so a lot of the things we take for granted in our storylines, like cutscenes and sometimes even dialogue, hadn't been implemented into games yet. The NES was one of those first big steps into a gaming era apart from the arcade, so developers were still marketing gameplay over storyline, because you don't go to the arcade to read a book. And sure, you can call it a cop-out story, but how about a hero rescuing a princess from a monster? I mean, a plumber. Sure, the whole "it was a dream" thing reminds me of a terrible way to end a television series, but for gaming, sometimes it allows us to experiment with gameplay ideas. In this case, it was used to borrow another game's gameplay, but the concept has been used in other games with great success. Take Link's Awakening or Majora's Mask from the Zelda series, for example. Majora's Mask is regarded as one of the high points in the series, though its storyline contributes nothing to the overall timeline. The moral of the story? Let the gameplay speak for itself, especially when talking about older games. After all, do you ever hear people comparing storylines from any other NES games? Defense. Contributions to the Mario series. The important thing to remember is that Mario Bros. 2 actually contributed a lot to the Mario franchise. The first thing it gave us was a wider palette of enemies to be used in later games. Because, let's face it, enemies in the other 2 Mario games come in 3 basic flavors: Koopas, Goombas, and seafood. Mario 2 was a breath of fresh air that gave us all sorts of new, bizarre, and surreal enemies, like the Pokey, Snippets, Birdo, and even the Shy Guy. That's right, one of the most odd and beloved characters from the Yoshi series and the Mario Party games got his start in Mario Bros. 2. My question is, why not keep all these awesome bosses? I mean, word can hit the bricks, but what about the three-headed snake thing? That was awesome. Of the game's most standout contributions, though, is actually another graphical effect. Mario Bros. 2 was the first game where Luigi was noticeably taller than Mario. Both before and a little bit after, the two iconic plumbers were nearly palette swaps, switching out Mario's red for Luigi's green. Whether it was just to satisfy the sprites of the character he was filling in for, we'll never know, but it's safe to say that this game had a big impact on the character of Luigi. Increased exploration. Don't get me wrong, Mario is a really linear game by nature, but Super Mario Bros. 1 is simply a military obstacle course. You could only go one direction and you were under a strict time limit. It wasn't about exploration, it was about quickly choosing your path and making your way to the finish line. And sure, Mario 2 had a lot of the same traits, like the idea of stages, but it encourages you to explore a lot more. At any point you can trace your way all the way back to the beginning of a level without the pressure of time. Add in new vertical scrolling components, some indoor segments, those neat subcon doors, and you've got a new wide world to explore. And just, how about them graphics? New mechanics. Mario 2 was also littered with all sorts of new gameplay components, namely picking up and throwing items at enemies. Haters will shorten this concept to chucking veggies, but that's not a fair assessment. Sure, a large part of the concept was plucking various vegetables from the ground and throwing them, but in terms of spontaneous ground ammo, it makes way more sense than, like, boulders or blades of grass or something. Also, let's not overlook how brutally you can punish your enemies. You can chuck them off cliffs, into quicksand, or even into each other. Now, a lot of people try to shit on these mechanics and act like the game doesn't warm you up to them. After all, it is a lot to take in, but quickly, let's think back to that very first level. Notice how you fall from the sky. Already, if this was a Mario 1 level, that'd be the end of it. Not to mention that, almost naturally, most players will drift to the left or right in search of something to land on. If you do this, you'll quickly notice that you wrap around the screen. That's some vertical scrolling. Honestly, this is like one of the first games I remember where it had a horizontal wraparound. When you walk through the first door, oh hey look, you can use doors now. The first thing you'll notice in front of you are some veggies and some enemies. Now, it may be asking a little much for you to immediately pick up what the vegetables for, even though if you do it, you can get this sick Shy Guy whammy. But if you try your typical Mario Bros. Tactics on these enemies, you'll quickly notice that they don't die. That leaves you with just one more button. Just one more. Now if you get risky and try it with this strangely plentiful grass, kaboom, look, new shit. People also give the potions a hard time. However, the game's quick to show you what's up. The first potion is literally the first piece of grass when you climb this small vine. Now, unless you're crazy, and you're not crazy, are you? You probably set it down right next to you, and you walk through the door, since we established you already know about the doors. Now, you have a little bit of time to pick up the one thing other than you that's not in black and white. You can even pull up the grass to teach small children to gamble. More characters. For the first time in the Mario series, Mario 2 let us play as characters other than Mario and Luigi. And in fact, they even gave Luigi new abilities. Mario remains, well, the Mario of the cast. Luigi jumps super high, Toad runs really fast, and Peach inexplicably floats. I can explain dream worlds, and I can explain vegetables, but I still can't explain that. Super useful though. And while this was a forced adaptation brought on by Doki Doki Panic's selection of 4 characters, this allowed players to strategize and choose how to tackle a level. For example, in World 1-3, you can use Luigi to skip a locked door by super jumping off an enemy's head. Also, in World 4, you can use Peach to float over enemies you'd have no chance with on the ground. And I'm sure Toad's useful, like somewhere. Final verdict. So let's take a look at the facts. We have a Japanese Mario Bros. 2, a continuation of the first game, and Super Mario USA, a wholly original game that Miyamoto even spent more time on. It had better graphics, new characters, and new mechanics, and in a modern era of gaming some have dubbed the sequel factory. Isn't it a relief to know that Nintendo of America had your interests in mind in recruiting this great new game for the NES? If you still feel like giving Mario Bros. 2 a hard time, maybe it's time to pick it up again, but this time with a new mindset. And then maybe, just to remember what an actual shitty Mario game looks like, maybe pick up Hotel Mario or Mario is Missing. Or, don't. Just enjoy Mario 2 for what it is. A great installment in a great series. I rest my case. Do you know a game that got a raw deal? Are your friends criticizing or praising some minor installment in a franchise simply to seem different or educated? Put an end to their shallow hipster bullshit. Give Perry Starman a call. Get video game justice on your side. And in the meantime, why not like, comment, subscribe, etc.